All right. Well, welcome again to the OFM podcast. And on the heels of Dr. Kathy, we've got the real world scientist, Jeff Browning, here today. And I want to call him a real world scientist because that's what we do. I mean, myself, Jeff, Kathy, we're actually putting this concept and the products around it into practice and developing it. So, and that's kind of a different thing from the published science where we control everything. We're trying to control the variables and look at one thing, but as Jeff well knows from his career as racing, there's a lot of variables in the mix and they're all moving constantly. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be back.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is going to be a great conversation today. We've got lots of rabbit holes to go on, but for those who don't know, Jeff Bronco Billy Browning, he is a professional ultra runner and arguably in the top 5 of the elite mountain ultra specialists at the 100-mile plus distance. It's certainly in the top 10, but based on his finishes, I would say the top 5. He's just coming off the heels of running the Moab 240. This is his first attempt at the 200-mile plus distance. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, that is my first time going that far.
Yeah, I can hear the enthusiasm for it in your voice.
It was a long way.
But you managed to get through it with the win and the course record on that particular course in spite of the heat, right?
Yep, I did. I managed myself pretty well. I mean, I did make some mistakes, but that was part of that was just first time mistakes that I wouldn't probably repeat a second time.
Okay. So is this like having a baby? Something you say you're
a little bit. Asked me when I finished when I was sitting in the chair with my feet in an ice bucket, will you do another one? And I was like, I think I like hundreds better, but after I've slept on it, now it's been, 2.5 weeks. I would probably do another one for sure.
But you do it a lot. You'd leverage all you've learned off of this one.
Yeah. And there's some little like biomechanical things that I need to work on. It made me realize that I have a couple of weaknesses still in the chain that I need to kind of sort out. And I think I know how to deal with them, but it just makes you a better runner to go that far because we always kind of joke as a coach. I always joke with my athletes, like ultra running screams your weaknesses. And I definitely going 200 plus definitely screams your weaknesses. So if you have some weakness in your chain somewhere, it will show up. So I think that was, there were some eye-opening things in that. There's some strategy stuff. I like the distance because of the strategy. The strategy, there's so much more ways to like dial in logistics and crew, and it becomes pacers, and like there's so much more strategy, sleep deprivation and sleep strategy, because everyone's a little different in how much sleep they want or how good they function in sleep deprivation. And so even hydration and electrolyte balance, you and I have already chatted about this on just a side phone call about, I retained a bunch of water the first night because I kept my drink rate too high on the first night after the heat broke, and I retained water. And then once you retain that water, it's hard to get rid of that extra water, because I've had my sodium per liter test rate done. So I know what that is. And I have that pretty dialed in, but I did over drink the first night, and then I retained water. And then from that point forward, the only way to get rid of it is to pee it out. And that takes forever.
Right. And that's why I find that these sodium sweat tests are they're so misleading, because people do a test and they say, this is my sodium per liter water rate. And it's true at the time you take that test under the conditions you're taking that test.
Well, no. I would even argue, no, now we know we have more data on that now. And one of the things we know about sodium per liter is we've had people retested. It doesn't change. It's genetic. So one thing that the sodium per liter is genetic, but what is trainable is your sweat rate. So meaning how much liquid per hour you're dumping. And that's easy to test. Anyone can do that at home. They can go way naked, go for an hour run, don't pee, go for an hour run, don't drink, don't pee, and come back and towel off and weigh yourself naked again. If you lose a pound, you need to drink 16 ounces an hour in those conditions. So one of the things one of the takeaways I've come out of this from is I need to test, say in the taper, every time I taper before a race, I need to test in the heat of the day and in the coldest part of the day. So two times during the day that I need to do that test. So that means I need to see what my height of heat conditions are at my dump rate. And if that's say 2 pounds, that would be 32 ounces. That would be a liter an hour basically. And then if it was early in the morning, like 5 a.m. when it's the coldest part of the day, if I went out and ran in 40 degrees or 35 degrees here in Flagstaff and in the early morning, and I only dumped a half a liter, a pound, I lost a pound in an hour, so I can extrapolate that data based on the heat of the day versus the night. And then you can say, okay, well, the heat just broke at 5 or 6 p.m. going into the night. Well, maybe it's 3/4 of a liter an hour, and so you can guesstimate on that drink rate, and then you probably won't retain much water. And so I think there's two pieces to hydration, at least the way I'm coaching it now. And that is, if you've had your test, we know what your genetic sodium dump rate is. That doesn't really change. What does change is sweat rate.
Yeah, it's pretty stable. Let's just say it's more stable because you can change hormonal stuff and other stuff and that'll change it slightly, but you're right, that's a more stable thing. But the environmental conditions are so dynamic, and that's why, like I said to you,
you got to back off on your drink rate.
Right, you got to consciously back off, because when the heat breaks, your body's still thinking it's got to drink to maintain that really high sweat rate. But until those hormonal and enzymatic change, like the vasopressin hormone and all these things shift, that takes a little bit of time. And then all of a sudden you find yourself, like you said, retaining fluid, and it takes forever to dump.
Yeah, it took days. So I was dealing with it the rest of the race. And then I was dealing with it after the race for like 2 days before I really got it all peed out. So it just takes a long time once you retain that water. So the goal is to avoid doing that, right? So you don't have that extra water weight. One, you're carrying extra water weight. So even if you came into the race like lean, mean fighting machine, you're like, 5-6 pounds up, and you're like having to carry that uphill. So,
well, and not only that, but that when you get into that, you start to get the potential for blistering goes up because you're retaining fluid in your feet, and it really does that too. Let's shift this a little bit, because we're already going down the rabbit holes, right?
Totally.
Which is what we love to do when we get together.
Well, this was a lesson. This was a lesson that I learned from running a 200 plus.
Right. And this is the thing. So for those of you out there, Jeff just did the Moab 240, and it circles Moab. It literally circles Moab, and it has everything from the desert, the high desert, Red Rock, where there's nowhere to hide, as you found out the first couple of days.
Yeah. Don't forget your SPF lip balm.
Right. And then it goes up into the LaSalle Mountains, where you get into some high altitude conifer and quaking aspen mountains and canyons. And so the temperature swings can be pretty extreme. And so this is what we do with OFM and Vespa. This is what Jeff is really an experiment of how we and the other team members, like Peter Mortimer, just did that backyard ultra. We kind of push those envelopes, and we learn a lot of really cool things from them. And that's what we're going to be talking about is all these cool things about pushing that envelope, because this really pushed your envelope, because you were not only just trying your first 200 plus mile race, but you were also gunning for the win, which you got, right?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
I was trying to get the course record. So yep. I might have,
and you did on that course.
I did on the standard course. That is the standard course record now. Courtney DeWalter had it, and I got it by a little less than maybe 28 minutes or something like that, I think is what I ended up getting it by. Not very much. She ran a solid race in 2017. So super impressive performance by her, obviously. And that was one of her kind of like early kind of like, whoa, who is this that's coming on the scene? That was before she's done a ton of winning. And she'd already won some stuff, but she wasn't really on big on people's radar yet. And when she won that outright and just ran away with it that year, it was pretty impressive. And no one's come close to that. I think Mike McKnight's come the closest at 59 hours, and she was 57, 55. So no one had come close to really getting her record on the standard.
What was your time?
57:27. And I in hindsight, like if I could figure out this, I got it kind of like sort of a sore, bruised second Met head on my right foot. And that was really the last like 50 miles was really affecting my downhilling. And so I definitely was not running very well the last 40 or 50 miles. You know, I left a lot on the course, you know, that in hindsight, if I could fix that issue, that's what I was talking about. You know, it screams your weaknesses. And I've had that little bit of a metatarsal soreness at the end of hundreds a little bit on really rocky courses, technical courses. So I know there's something going on there, and I have some theories on how to fix it at this point. So I'm working on that, but to avoid it in the future, because if I could have finished stronger, because I still had the legs. My legs were still there. It's just my foot was my weak point at that point. So.
Yeah, it's like when Michele Gragli ran and he pulled that hamstring and it just totally blew his race.
Yeah, and I think it's also just it's such a long race and there's so many little things that can go wrong, and 200s are hard to put them. It's hard to nail them because there's so much room for error in 2.5 days or 3 days. It's just you can miss one thing up and it slows you way down. So
yeah, and there's a fatigue sets in the potential for things to go sideways. It also goes up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about first your race and how you went through it, and besides these things with hydration and your metatarsal, the heat, what you did, and then we'll segue into like things about how OFM, how you use Vespa, and how these things really allow you to do it. By the way, how's your recovery going now? I know this.
My legs my legs feel pretty good. Like I really managed the week after. I really was pretty strict on diet, and so that really helped like get rid of inflammation, recover. I just slept a lot. I took 5 full days off after the race, and like just slept 10 or 12 hours a night and was just really deep fatigued. Like I think because you miss sleep for a couple nights, I was really like just kind of just emotionally, spiritually, physically tired. And so I listened to that. I slept and I ate really, really well. I didn't eat any junk for the first week. And then I kind of woke up. So I finished on a Sunday afternoon. And that following Saturday, I woke up Saturday morning after like 11 hours of sleep. And I woke up without my alarm. I sat up in bed at like 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And I'm like, I'm going to go for a bike ride today and lift weights. So I got up, I went and did an hour bike ride on my gravel bike. And then I lifted weights, light dumbbell workout. If anybody follows me on Instagram, it's my Tough 24 workout. I did that with really light weights. And I felt awesome after that. I was like, oh man, I flushed everything out. I was moving again. And I was like, I kind of felt normal again. And so then I was able to, I rode for 5 days straight. And then on Tuesday, so this would have been about 9 days. 9 days after the race, I ran for my first time. I ran like a little over 3 miles. And I just ran easy. I went to my son's run club and ran easy with them. They did a workout, but Irish jogged during the workout, and because they were doing intervals. And I just jogged through that and ran like a little like 3.3 miles or something. And then I biked the next day, and then I ran on Thursday again. And I've run, and then this last 13 days after the race, after I finished the race, no, excuse me. Yeah, 13 days after I finished the race, I paced Mike McKnight on the Arizona Trail on Saturday for 20 miles. So 13 days after a 240. Now it was easy pace. Obviously, we're hiking a lot, and it was a big climb day, so we were hiking a lot more. But I went and did 5,000 feet of climbing in 20 miles in about 5 hours and 45 minutes.
Nice. Yeah. And it was effortless.
Yeah, I felt pretty good. I mean, I felt a little bit of like fatigue in my hips still a little bit, and my mid back from wearing a pack. Like I'm still a little tight. Like I got a massage last week, and I still got a little bit of like a trap thing. I was in a bike wreck in 2011, like where I body checked the back of an SUV in a roundabout at like 20 miles an hour and broke a rib and broke my hand and on my left side. And so there's some like imbalances
There's
going
some
on.
compensation. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, 20 plus years as a graphic designer, sitting at a desk with working a mouse and being in a forward head posture before I started doing a standing desk, there's a lot of like, there's some imbalances there and tightness that is kind of chronic that I'm always fighting off a little bit. And the pack definitely aggravated that a little bit after the race. And I've been dealing with that right trap's been a little fired up. So, and I've been on the bike, which doesn't help the trap.
No. Yeah. The two things in modern life that I tell athletes that are the kiss of death are sitting at a computer and riding a road bike.
Yeah, totally. And so those two things didn't help. And then I had to wear a pack with 3 liters of water, to pace Mike in the desert. So that was like another kind of thing that was the only really things that were bothering me. Other than that, I mean, my right metatarsal still, that one met head is still a little tender towards the end of the run. It was a little tender, but it, now I'm pressing on it and it feels okay.
But this goes back to what you're saying that, doing ultras, for regular people, a 50 miler or 100 miler, but for you, it brings out these things. So if you're paying attention, it's like, we can address these things.
Yeah. And that's what I'm doing. I'm addressing those things, but overall, like my legs feel pretty good. I think I'm still a little,
you're not peaking. You're not peaking yet.
No, I can tell the adaptation isn't fully set in yet, but I feel pretty good, overall. Like I'm not like groggy or mentally tired anymore. That was only for about 5 days. Once I kind of caught up on sleep, I feel like everything kind of clicked again. So I've been kind of back with it, and that's been good.
Do you take naps?
No. I mean, if I don't get enough sleep at night, sometimes I'll take a quick power nap, but that's very rare. Like we're talking like, maybe 4 or 5 times a year. Yeah.
When you're in one of these deep recovery phases after a run, if you instead of hitting the coffee, hit the nap, because that's usually what happens is like, you go through your morning and late morning, early lunch, you'll have early midday, you'll have a lunch or late breakfast, and then you'll hit that really tired phase. And a lot of that has to do with your HGH kicking in, because you get a surge in HGH after these things as part of that whole thing when you're fat adapted. And so you really want to go with that if you can, because it really leverages, not just the recovery, but the super compensation, the adaptive stuff. So, but I
did take a nap or two the first week, if I remember right. It's kind of hazy. So,
yeah, but see, the fact that you were sleeping 10, 12 hours a night or whatever you were sleeping, that's also part of that HGH surge. And you're going to continue that for the next week or so. I mean, for a 240, it's probably a 2 or 3 week process. And then all of a sudden it's like, I'm ready to train again. Hard.
And then I'm still not like super motivated to train hard yet. Like I like getting out every day. So I've just been getting out and just kind of going with it. Like yesterday, I only ran like 4.5 miles, it was like 45 minutes and I just went really easy and just went for an easy trail run. So I'm not really training hard or anything. Obviously it's only been, 2.5 weeks, but I'm back kind of running regularly again.
Let's kind of run through the Moab 240 about your, kind of give us a a 40,000 foot overview of how it went in terms of the conditions, the fueling,
Okay.
kind of pacing, stuff like that. And then we'll dive into a few more specifics.
I mean, I think overall, like I went into this like wanting to get the course record. Part of me, was like telling behind the scenes was telling myself, is this smart to go after the course record when you've never run one before? But I also felt like I had coached it enough that I understood it on paper, and I felt like I had a pretty good strategy going to it. I had a good crew, and I felt like it was within my wheelhouse to get it. So
you had the basics.
Yeah, I had the basics. And so what I did was just ran comfortably the whole first day. I just tried to constantly relax. I still probably ran the first 100 a little too hot. I ran 20 hours and 6 minutes for the first 100.
And in the context, what was the temperature like?
It was hot. So this was the hottest first 3 days they've ever had in history of the race. Now they've had a hotter first day on record in 2020. They had a really hot record-breaking first day, but then it cooled off on Saturday and Sunday. But we had consistent heat for 3 days. So for my 3 days, it cooled off by Monday a little bit, but it was hot every day. So, I think the forecast was in the upper 80 or the 80s, mid 80s in Moab. But if you get down in that, where you head south into like towards Indian Creek, that area is really dark rock. It's that dark red rock, and it's really exposed, and you're running south into the sun. So the first day was really hot. It was really exposed. I mean, I had everything. I managed well. I covered up with like white arm sleeves, and I had like a bandana hanging out of my hat. I obviously didn't manage my lips very well because I forgot SPF lip balm, and I got 2nd-degree burns on my bottom lip, which I'm still paying a little bit for. But that was a big oversight. But then overall, I felt good. I managed myself well. I drank enough that first day. I didn't get dehydrated. I was carrying 3 to 4 liters depending on the section.
Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot of fluid. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of fluid, because you have a 22-mile section in that day with only no crew and no aid station. So you just have a water stop, and then you have a 22-mile section and a water stop, and then crew. So, or an aid station, excuse me. So like it's a huge section, 22 miles running into the sun in the heat of the day for me up front. And so I drank 4 liters through there, because that's a long section. I think it was a 4-hour section. So I was drinking 1 liter an hour. And then I went into the night, managed the night pretty well. It's a really technical section down through like the island, and you run down in this ravine, and then you finally eventually are climbing. I took a little 3-minute nap on the climb up Shea Mountain, which is like 8,500 or over 8,500 feet, I think. But you go up into the aspens and pines again, up into some higher mountain stuff. And so climbing up that, I was a little tired early in the morning, like 6 a.m. before dawn. Took a little dirt nap for like 3 minutes. I looked at my watch, crashed out, got cold, sat up. It'd only been 3 minutes. But then I got moving, and I was moving really well after that, after I took a like 3-minute power nap. And then went through that aid station, picked up a pacer, went out back down into the desert. We descend back down into the desert to head north towards the La Salles. And that's a pretty long, dry section. Like it's big. You drop down into the valley by 140. And then you have a kind of a marathon gravel road section. That's rolly gravel road. I definitely
I know that section. I've paced a guy there in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I was running it in the afternoon. So it was Saturday, second day. It was hot. I was sick of the sun. I was sick of the heat at that point. I was a little pissy in that section. Just with my buddy Derek was pacing me, and I was a little complaining, just a touch. I was pretty quiet, but I just wasn't super stoked on that section. I also had quit caffeinating in the afternoon with a planned sleep at 167 in the evening. I quit caffeinating. In hindsight, I didn't need to, because one of the things I found was in that once you get sleep deprived, for me at least, 3 hours is I've already metabolized the caffeine. It's gone, and I'm ready to sleep. So, but I gave myself 6 or 7 hours. And so I really struggled that 2 or 3 hours coming into 167, the last 2 or 3 hours of that road, I was just weaving on the road. I kept talking about like, I need like a 3-minute nap. I need a nap. I just kept thinking about a 3-minute nap. And I finally got to that aid station, slept 30 minutes, left there right at dusk to head up into the LaSalle's for the night in night 2. And I needed 3 5-minute dirt naps from 167 to 201.
Is that the one at the base of the high point of the LaSalle's?
So that's at the very base on the highway 46, road 46.
Right.
So I hit, that's a big aid station. I slept there.
That's a huge one. Yeah.
Yep. We geared up for the night and I had a pacer. My buddy Jean was a pacer, and he paced me up through that section to Geyser at 201.
Okay,
so
that's right. That's the one at the base of the high point.
Yeah, I needed a nap, like 3 5-minute naps through that section, like here and there, dirt naps. Like anytime I'd really start struggling and like slowing down, I would just say, hey, dude, I need a nap. And I would take 5 minutes and I would be boom, moving again really, really well. So I kind of really learned that, like, to go with it when your body's like, I just need to sleep. You just take 5 minutes, reset, boom, you're moving really well again for a couple hours. So that was a really long section. It was cold. We went through, that's kind of the high point of the course. When you get to Geyser, it's almost 10,000.
Which one's got, so you have the one at that big aid station at the base of the LaSalle's. And
then you go up to Pole Canyon, and then you climb, and then you go Pole Canyon. From Pole Canyon to Geyser is a 14.5-mile section in the LaSalle's. And that is a tough section. It's overgrown a little bit. It's very, very narrow. It's like primitive trail. It doesn't get a lot of traffic.
There's a lot of really tight canyons with switchbacks.
Yeah, it's just traversing around South Mountain to the west. So it's working around the southwest side of the mountain and over to the west side of the mountain. And then eventually you're traversing, and then you gain a gravel road and climb 1.5 miles up to Geyser at 201. And I hit Geyser at like 6 a.m. So it was like an hour before dawn. And it's the coldest part of the morning. And it was my crew said their truck said 27 degrees at Geyser. And there was probably a 20 mile an hour wind coming down slope off the peak.
Ooh.
So like when I hit the road, we were protected as we were traversing in the trees. But once we hit that road for the 1.5 mile climb up to the aid station, I got really cold there. And that was a lesson too. Like, even if you're only 1 mile from the aid station, if you're cold, you better stop and put another layer on. But I was like, I had shed a layer during the night in that traverse because we were working so hard. And once I hit that road, I just had wind right in my face. It's 27 degrees. I'm getting a headwind coming down the mountain off the cold peaks, right? Coming off 12,000 foot peaks. And it's just the wind chill factor is probably in the teens. So that gives you the temperature range for that race. Like, you're probably looking at teen wind chill factor in night if you're in the LaSalle's, and then you got 90s in the desert. So it was gnarly section. Like I just was so
well.
Cold.
I also think from where you start into the steep part of the LaSalle's, right? You go from that base camp after that flat section up to that next camp, and then from there all the way to that place on the Red Rocks where you climb up to the aid station and you start that. I think that's where the course is GPS correctly, but I think in terms of the actual distance, there's several miles more there.
I think so too. I mean, that was 14.5 miles.
It's way more than that. I can tell you.
Well, it's 14.5 miles and it took me over 6 hours. And I was moving well the whole time. Like I was power hiking hard, and we couldn't really. Now I would say this: we weren't able to run the downhills very well in that section. Some of it was overgrown, or there was enough. Yeah. There was enough aspen leaves on the ground, and they were reflecting our light because it rained that afternoon. An afternoon thunderstorm had come through, and so everything was soaking wet. And so it was like reflecting weird light, and you couldn't see the roots and rocks very well because it was kind of covered up. So there was a lot of jog a little, hike a technical section on the downhill, jog a little. And it's very overgrown on the west side because there's an old burn there. and the aspens are coming back in like sapling size, like 3 to 4 feet tall. They still had leaves on them in that section. So it was just, you couldn't even see the trail. You're bushwhacking.
Well, not to mention you have to be looking for the markers in the trail because it's easy to get off course there.
Yeah, totally.
But just so the audience knows, like I did some back in the 90s, I pioneered bringing the GPS to the aerial application industry in Latin America. And what people don't know is like in those, especially those north facing canyons where there were a lot of switchbacks, they probably aren't picking up satellites when they measure that. So the GPS takes the last coordinate and goes to the next coordinate, picks up. So it's going to draw a straight line.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, I know Candace said she's measured those areas 3 or 4 times, but on a GPS as narrow and as those canyons are and the way they are facing, I think it's you go slow because it's high and it's you can't see and it's technical and you got the quaking aspens, but I think there's more than 2 or 3 miles of 2 or 3 at least that are there that's not covered in the GPS. I
would guess that too. And I would also say that it's pretty heavy tree cover. There's a lot of pines and a lot of aspens in there. Yep. And it's pretty thick in spots. And
a lot of switchbacks in some of those canyons.
There's a ton of switchbacks, tons of little switchbacks too, where it's like 5-10 meters and you're constantly just weaving. So I'm sure that the GPS isn't picking that fully. So I got through that section. I got up to the aid station. I was pretty cold there. I asked for a 15-minute nap. They put me in the van, covered me up. I put dry layers on and I slept. They gave me 13 minutes because I was on course record pace. So they told me they'd give me 15 and gave me 13 and kicked me out. But I got up. They had to put hot water bottles on my chest to get me warm. I was still cold after the nap. And I got layered up, put down on tights, put all my layers on and left there fully bundled. We'd put hand warmer packets in like a chest pocket next to my heart. We had hand warmer packets in my gloves. And I left there like with a pacer and to the finish and the last, 38 miles. And within an hour, I was shedding layers and was warm again, but because dawn hit and it started to slowly warm up and I was moving well after the nap. I ran that section pretty well down past Uwa Lake and down to head towards Porcupine, the last aid station, the start of Porcupine Rim. And then that's when my foot the gravel road section in that, my foot started bothering me. And that's when through the rest of the race, the foot was kind of there. I finally taped it with like 7 miles to go. Like I had a little mini blister kit on me. And I put like a Compede pad.
Was that before or after Hidden Valley?
What's that?
Was that before or after Hidden Valley?
That's so that's like the last 38. So from Geyser, you climb just a little bit and then you go down through, you're dropping out of the LaSalle's and traversing a little bit. And then you finally you get over near Warner Lake and you drop just below Warner Lake and the campground and you hit the gravel road that accesses Warner Lake. And you drop that gravel road all the way down to that loop highway that comes up high in the LaSalle's that's above Porcupine Rim. We hit that, we run the road for just a little bit, jump on another gravel road, and we work gravel all the way over to Porcupine Rim. And then we drop into Porcupine Rim. And that's the last aid station. So that's way after Dry Valley's like 140. 140 to 160 range.
They might have changed the course or something because the course, you drop down off the red rock down to the Colorado River. And then go
that's Porcupine Rim. So you drop Porcupine Rim, you work your way over to Porcupine Rim, and then you run Porcupine Rim down to the Colorado River and the Colorado River back up into town to the north end of town, and it finishes in the north end of town. Okay. So they've changed the course like a little bit, the start finish. It used to start on the south end of town, and now it finishes and starts on the north end of town. So you run through town early in the morning and get all that out of the way.
Okay. So because when I paced and crewed in 2017, there was an aid station there at the north end of town on the Colorado River in the park.
Yeah. So that's where it finishes now. And it used to, so now that first where you started that year, where they started in 2017.
That was way out on Cane Creek Road.
Yeah, that's the first aid station.
Ah, okay.
Oh, way south on the south end of town. So you run that. I can't remember what that's called.
There's a pipeline, and you climb up to Hidden Valley, go out Hidden Valley, come down the Red Rock, and then go up the road.
Yeah, so that now you start on the north end of town. You run pipeline all the way down, and then you climb up to Hidden Valley.
Okay.
Right? Up to Hidden Valley, and then you work your way over to Massaback.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's the
start. So that's the start now. That's
okay.
That's not any kind of a finish. So they used to finish on the south end of town. 2017, Courtney would have finished on the south end of town. You had to run pipeline at the end.
That's right. Yeah, yep. You ran pipeline up Hidden Valley, and then you came,
yep.
Then you worked your way north, and then down this 4-wheeler Red Rock, you hit the road and ran the road in.
Yeah. So now it's that way. So that was, so once I hit from like Porcupine, on the way to Porcupine and in, my foot was really bothering me. So it really slowed me down.
That had to, because that's a long downhill to the river.
It's long. And I even at one point, I was like, it hurt to go slow. So I decided I was going to run hard. And because if it hurts to go slow, it's going to hurt to go fast. I might as well just go fast. So I started doing steady state effort because my legs were still there. So I just started hammering like probably 2 or 3 7-minute interval sessions with some hydration and food in between.
And a Vespa.
Yeah, and a Vespa. And about a half an hour, 45 minutes of that. And then I was like, oh my God, I started my foot was really flaring up at that point. And so I started taking a bunch of hike breaks. I was getting kind of really low mentally. I was in the heat. The heat was beating on me, your third day of heat. And because it was midday. And you're still up on top is where I dropped down into Porcupine Rim. So you're still up on the top of the rim. And so you're really exposed in there, and it was hot and there's no shade. And there's finally one little tiny tree, a little juniper that I sat under. It was 7 miles to go. And I I took my sock and shoe off, and I put a Compeed patch on the second met head on my right foot, and then put a piece of Leuko tape over that to hold it in place, just hoping it would pad it a little bit, and that was enough to distribute the weight differently on my foot. So it went from a 9 out of 10 pain to a 6 out of 10. And when you've had a 9 out of 10 and all of a sudden you have a 6 out of 10, you're like, oh my gosh, that feels so much better. And so then I could run. I just couldn't lead with that foot on downhills. So I had to always lead with the left foot on downhills to weight it and push off on up any stair steppy stuff. It went uphill. I'd have to push off on my left foot. And so I always had to kind of baby the right foot a little bit. So that allowed me to run again though. And so that got me to the finish. And then I was pretty worked afterwards. That foot was pretty sore. I couldn't really weight it. I actually cut up a pair of my Ultra Mont Blanc BOA into slides. So I cut the toe off, the heel off, and made it into a pair. I forgot my Crocs, for post race, when your feet are really gnarly, you want either slides or Crocs or something that nothing's touching your toes or your feet, and I'd forgotten that to bring them. And so I got back and I was like, oh man, all I had was 0 sandals. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I can't run. I need padding. So I cut up my BOAs and went and bought an aftermarket arch support insole at the general store in Moab and put that in, and that helped distribute the weight off my metatarsal head.
Wow.
For recovery.
What shoes were you wearing? I know you run for ultra, so which ultra model were you?
First 70 miles, 71 miles, I ran in the Mont Blanc BOA, the new BOA shoe lacing system. I ran in that shoe, and then I switched to a Temp 4. It's a prototype with a little bit of a different foam in it. So I that we're experimenting with right now at innovation, the innovation team is. So I had 2 pairs of that shoe in 2 different colors. So I ran in the Temp 4 through pretty much to 140, 71 to 140. I ran in the Temp 4. Then I switched to the Olympus for that marathon section on the road. I was really not liking that shoe. I don't run that shoe very often, but I was thinking I just need cushion. But I really was annoyed by that shoe the whole time, unfortunately. And then I switched back to the Temp 4, the other Temp 4 I had, and finished out the race from 167 to 239. So
yeah. The Olympus, I've never worn the Olympus, but I got one of the first pairs of Taurins when they put the Taurin out. And my description of it, it's like driving around in an old 1967 Ford Galaxy 500.
Yeah, I mean, the new Olympus is really actually pretty good. I mean, I like it for like recovery days when I'm kind of beat up. I've run in it, but for some reason it was just a little too stiff for me. Like at that point in the race, I wanted something softer, like just softer upper. You know, I just wanted more give, and it was just too stiff for me, and it just kind of annoyed me the whole time. You know, and I think, you know, that was my main shoe, but the Temp 4 is the one I mainly run in. I love the BOA, those two shoes. And so I think, you know, in hindsight, the Temp 4 was like the shoe I should run in the whole time, you know, but because that didn't cause me any issues. But anyway, point being, I switched, I went through a lot of different shoes through that race. And ended up liking the Temp 4 the best.
And just so the audience knows, Jeff and I are parsing through the nuances of each shoe. We're not bagging on the ultras. We're both actually big believers on them. Jeff's not just sponsored by Ultra because he's sponsored by Ultra. He's sponsored by Ultra because he believes in the philosophy and the shoe design.
I do believe in zero drop and foot shaped toe box and natural foot function.
Absolutely. I actually saw the first Lone Peak, the prototype Lone Peak, when they had it back in 2008 or 2009. And I immediately got on board with them. And I still have my original pair of Lone Peaks. Those things were they were clunky, but they were bomb proof.
Yeah. And that's it. They were actually a pretty good little shoe. I really got turned on to them in the when it was the Lone Peak 2. That was kind of my first favorite shoe, was the Lone Peak 2. And I came on in 2015 is when I started running for them, and have been with them ever since. So I've actually been approached by a couple other brands, but I put some kind of a heel, like a drop on, and I'm like, I can't run in this shoe. And something with like a narrower toe box, it's just like shuts off your big toe, you know, and then you're like in a drop. So you got like a high heel. Hate it.
Yeah. So, well, you never know right now, because if you look at the shoes right now, they're all getting wider on the toe box. They used to be really pointy, and now everybody's shoes getting a lot wider. So.
Yeah. Everybody's, and athletes are asking for it. You know, that's one thing. I know a couple of Solomon athletes that are, you know, asking for wider toe boxes in Solomon shoes, you know, for ultras. Cause you know, it's fine for like fast mountain running when you're going to bomb downhill to hold your foot in place for like a 15K. But if you're going to run a 50K or 100K or a 200 miler, you need you need toe box room.
Well, yeah. And it's to get the toes and the forefoot to splay out so that you're distributing the load across the footbed, which is what the zero drop concept and the big toe box do. Because like you're saying earlier, those weaknesses show up. You know, you can run a 5K or a 15K in a crampy shoe, but not a 50K.
Yeah. Not a long race, especially not a 2.
So now that you've done that, let's talk about your fueling, your hydration. I mean, we talked about all the water you're drinking, but we didn't talk about the electrolyte stuff, the fueling you did. I mean, how many calories you used, when you used them, how did you use Vespa?
I was pretty much on about 200 calories an hour for most of the race. I would eat protein. From 71 miles on, I ate protein when I saw crew.
Burger, or they had burgers
they were making me my own food, because I have a soy allergy, and I was worried about what they were cooking with. Like a lot of those aid stations will use like Pam, you know, like spray on cooking oil. And that's like seed oils, and it has soybean oil in it. And I didn't want to consume that. So my crew like made me my own food. We pre-made a bunch of mashed potatoes with just butter, with gold potatoes and butter, organic gold potatoes and butter and sea salt.
Nice.
And we put them in a Ziploc, or in a, not in Ziploc, like Tupperware containers, and kept them in a cooler, and they would just heat it up on a quick camp stove skillet. And then they mixed some hamburger with it, some grass-fed hamburger. And I ate that earlier. And then later, as I got farther into the race, I actually didn't want the burger anymore. It was too heavy. I wanted just eggs, like scrambled eggs and mashed potatoes. So I mainly did my own like kettle and fire chicken bone broth with extra sea salt in it, with Redmond real salt. And then, so they always had a mug of that, of warm broth. They always had a mug of coffee, like AeroPress coffee with some heavy whipping cream. And then they had usually a container with eggs and mashed potatoes, or eggs and hamburger. And I would just eat that. And then at any backcountry aid stations, if I wanted protein, I asked for eggs, and I asked them to cook it in butter, just because I saw they had Pam, and I can't have the Pam. I'm allergic to something in that. Please, do you have butter or anything? And they were completely accommodating as long as I asked. And then that's really all I consumed during the race was protein. When I saw crew, mainly focused on protein and carbs from potatoes.
So you were averaging about, when you say you're 200 calories an hour, so that was an average, including all that food.
Yeah, that was probably an average over the whole. I mean, I haven't figured up exactly, because it's hard to remember how much you consume when you're with crew. But if you look at like what I was doing on an IV drip in between those big checkpoints,
yep,
it was probably about 200 calories an hour, sometimes maybe a little less. And then during the heat of the day, I mainly did just really simple foods like fruit. Like I did, a little bit of banana or melon or something like that at an aid station. I didn't overly consume, I didn't do a lot of protein during the day.
Yeah.
Also, my crew had 2 water bottles the whole time, 2 20-ounce bottles. One had 1 scoop of Goo Recovery protein drink with some True Niagen in it. And then I also had, which is an NAD supplement. And then the other was a scoop of Redmond Relight in the other bottle, which is electrolytes basically. And I would just kind of drink on those while I was crewing, while they would just stick it in front of me. I'd chug some, then they'd give me another, I'd drink some more. So I maybe drink half of both of those. And then I'd drink some broth, and I'd drink some coffee, and then I'd, eat, and then I'd be moving again. So, probably, maybe threw down 200 or 300 calories in one setting at some of the crew spots. I ate a little more heavier calories during that time, but the rest of the time I was just kind of going on liquid calories, a little bit of gels, a little bit of Boulder brand potato chips, the avocado oil ones, and some salted plantain chips.
What were you using? You were using Redmond Relight. Were you using S caps?
I used S caps and Goo Roctane as my liquid nutrition, and then I took some Goo gels and some Goo chews here and there, just kind of occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, you use more in the night when it's cooler. You'd be just focusing on hydration during the heat of the day.
Yeah, totally. That was pretty much. And then Vespa every 2 hours. And then every once in a while, I'd take an extra Vespa with crew would give me one. When I was at a crew spot, they might give me an extra dose of Vespa. But I kept Vespa going the whole time, every 2 hours, 30 minutes before, and then every 2 hours. And that was my main kind of strategy the whole time. I didn't really ever have any stomach issues, no cramping, besides the water.
Obviously, from your recounting of the Moab 240, your mental acuity is there, because I mean, here you are describing in detail the trail, the conditions, what was going on. So you were in the moment, not only at the moment, but now, you can recall everything pretty clearly. Whereas, there's people talk about hallucinations, forgetting about sections of trail.
Yeah, I was pretty with it most of the time.
Like you said, you got cranky a little bit there on the.
I just got a little pissy sometimes, man. I was just like, and part of that was fatigue. when I wasn't caffeinating and I was like really, because I caffeinated about every 2 hours. I did some kind of caffeine every 2 hours during like, through like when I wanted to be awake and, and then I would stop caffeinating when I wanted to sleep. But, that was only at 167. So Saturday afternoon, I quit caffeinating that afternoon so I could sleep that evening. But yeah, that was my main strategy. I mean, I didn't really do much more than that, besides hydration, just drinking. I probably drank a little too much. Like we talked about earlier, I hydrated too much on night one, which made me retain water. And then I was very conscious of it after that. I really backed off on night two. So I didn't retain any more water, but I was just peeing like crazy, just trying to get rid of all that fluid. It was getting annoying, where you'd be like every 20 minutes, oh, I gotta pee again, dude. Hold on. And like, my pacer was like, dude, you're peeing a lot. I'm like, I know, I'm trying to drop all this fluid. So
yeah, that happened to me in my first 100, which was Western States in 2006, the year it got super hot. That was the year, what's his name? Morrison collapsed on the track.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
Right. And that's what happened to me on ALT from the river, because, it's hot. It was hot, the hottest race in the history of the race. And that's how I learned exactly how I advised you. Like when the heat breaks, you got to consciously back off, because
you got to back off.
When the heat broke for me, I was still drinking all the way up to the ALT aid station. I picked up 5 pounds.
Right. And that's back when they weighed you, right?
Yeah. And then after that, literally every 10 to 15 minutes, I was having to stop and pee, and I got blisters and everything else. And it was just like crazy. I mean, from ALT to 49, I was just like peeing like a racehorse on Lasix.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So yeah. No, I feel your pain there, and it is annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of recap all that, because, what, in terms of that, you said you felt metabolically fine the whole time. You were in the moment. Your legs felt good. It was just probably that little bit of compensation and that hammering on your metatarsal that kind of flared up.
That was really the only thing at the end was really bugging me. Like, because one of the things I did was I did those pickups on Porcupine Rim and realized, like, man, if my metatarsal head wasn't bothering me, like I could run right now fast. Like I could hammer this thing out and put the course record even lower. And that was frustrating. I definitely was getting in my head a little bit, because I was like, man, I got the legs, but I can't quite go. So that was a little frustrating, just that I had something else going on there. And so, but overall, like I felt clear and pretty good most of the time. Like that was one thing my pacers kind of chatted about, was like, man, you're pretty good. Besides that being a little, not super happy. I definitely apologized to my buddy Derek, because he was pacing me the last 40, and I kept, that was when my metatarsal was bothering me. And I was kind of like that sighing, and I was like, type.
Well, it was good. Yeah. Derek is a pacer, because he's pretty chill.
Yeah. He's really chill.
Yeah.
But he'd never seen me that, like, not that angry, but I was like not in a good mental place there for a little bit, but we just kept it rolling and finished it out, and it was fine.
Yeah. So, you're doing this at age 51 now?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the things I think is really germane to the audience and people to know is like I said, you're top 5, arguably top 5 in the world in terms of the 100-mile plus mountain specialty ultra running. But as I pointed out to you, looking at your ultra sign up results and knowing you've done also within that, some other things like your double rim to rim to rim, and a few other things, Wonderland route attempt, you're in that top 5 at 51. Now, and most of these guys are 15 to 20 years younger than you. You're doing way more big events than they are. I mean, like I said, when you look at your ultra sign up stuff from Hard Rock 2021 to Hard Rock 2022, both of which you placed fifth at, you were doing something every 6 to 8 weeks, something big.
Yeah, I race a lot.
You raced a lot, and I don't think anybody else is racing at that volume, at that much, because with that whole thing about OFM shifting the balance of damage, recovering from the damage, to focusing on the super compensation, the adaptive stress you get, the hormesis you get from that event, to getting stronger, you're actually back at peaking between 5 and 7 weeks after every big event. Now, maybe this one might take a little longer. You might be like more on the 7 week to peak again, but to talk about that a little bit and how you feel in that, because you're sort of been in that zone for the last year and a half, every 5 to 7 weeks.
I really have. I mean, I just don't, I feel like I bounce back pretty quickly, and I'm kind of motivated and ready to do something else again. So I'm also not getting like the burnout, mental fatigue that you sometimes get in ultras from doing too many races. Yep. Some people just lose their motivation, which is a sign of overtraining.
I think that there's a lot of physiological underpinnings for the mental, emotional burnout. Because
agreed.
I think the body really does know it's burnt out.
Yeah. And I felt really good. Like I just feel strong again, and I recover pretty quickly. I think that's definitely, I mean, I would say this if we're talking OFM and that approach, I definitely notice a difference compared to my former self in my mid and early 40s and late 30s. I definitely recover way faster and bounce back faster on OFM. I see that.
That's certainly not because of age, because everybody knows when you get older, it takes longer to recover.
Totally. And that's what everyone talks about, is like how it takes longer to recover. But one of the things I've seen as a coach, I coach a lot of OFM, and a ton of my athletes are doing OFM, and most of them are in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s. And a lot of them are veteran ultra runners or have been around the sport a while, and they're getting older and they're not recovering and they're gaining weight, and they're just like, they're coming to me to like kind of really focus on this OFM thing and try it out. And once they try it out, they're like, wow, the recovery on this is amazing. And to get that consistent message over and over and over again, it's really consistent. Like, especially with anyone who's a veteran ultra runner, or somebody who's been around the block a little bit and knows, or what ultra endurance,
ultra endurance. Yeah.
Yeah. They know they know what they feel like after a 100 miler or a 50 miler or 100K. And when
even a marathon. I mean, most people doing high carb on a marathon or take a month off.
Yeah. And so like, I'm seeing people just bounce back really fast. I'm seeing them, get down to get lean again in their 60s, or I've even had an athlete, say, I didn't think I could get this lean at 60 in my 60s, so, and, even had a wife in the background, because I was on speakerphone, in the background, say, thanks, Jeff Browning, because they got her husband lean again. Like he didn't have a gut anymore. So, like there's this huge auxiliary benefit to this lifestyle shift of just feeling clear-headed, consistent energy, weight maintenance. As you know, we all gain a little weight as we get older. That's kind of like the norm for people. And on OFM, I don't see that. Yeah. I would say this, I do coach my female athletes a little differently on OFM. We have a different approach, a little higher carb. I do a little more fuel separation method with them, separating their carbs and fats more. Protein's a constant. The other thing I do coach is a higher protein approach. For all my athletes, they do traditionally higher protein than would be recommended on a keto approach. So, and we use keto as a tool.
Yeah, I would
not a keto athlete.
Right. We need to frame that really, because there's a lot of misconceptions. The first thing people associate OFM with is keto.
And I think there's a lot of people get kind of chronic keto. When they start going keto, they get kind of carb phobic, and if they've done it for a while, and then they're, you know, they're really worried about their carb intake every day, and then they're trying to run ultras, and that's a bad combination. We use keto, and I would say this: we use ketogenic strategically. So it's an initial reset.
I would go even further, Jeff, because what I'm finding is the traditional ketogenic macros don't work. So, and I use diet. You use diet as a tool, just like I use diet as a tool. Like with the women, you separate the different macros out a little bit. And so the way I frame it is, OFM is a fat burning program. It's not a high fat diet. Because
exactly.
It's you know, yes, fats play into it big, but I don't see, in my own personal use, I've never see 70 or 80% fat macros.
No, me either. And
Yeah, I mean,
I don't coach that either. So I'm not coaching 70%. You know, I did play around with that in my early shifting and in my own diet. And I found that I ended up naturally upping my protein macros. My protein's really high. And then my fat, you know, it's more probably 30% protein and 50% fat and like 20% carbohydrate is probably more my macro combos when I look at it.
It shifts around because, like, when you're getting ready for a race, your carb macro will rise, your fat macro will go down. Protein, like you say, is relatively constant, but there's times when it gets low. Like when you're racing, when you're out there racing, those days you're racing, whether it's 100 or a 200 or a 50K, that day you might, you know, 90% of your intake may just be carbs.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be just mainly simple carbs and some complex carbs like potatoes or something, but fruit. But like you're not going.
But in terms of that day, you're still burning 80% of your fuel or more is coming from fat.
Yeah,
So it's a fat burning program rather than a high fat diet. And I think people get instantly pigeonhole OFM into that. And it's like, what we're trying to do is optimize that metabolic fat burning capacity. And, you know, like I said at the beginning, what's important about this is everybody gets, you know, right now, everybody's, you know, they all want to see the science, right? And I like to, you know, we're trying to develop some data. I'm talking to some people about doing some studies. There was the faster study, but that was focused more on the ketogenic diet than the whole OFM and the Vespa components, which, you know, with the data we've gotten in the various tests you've done, the testing we did in February clearly shows that there's a whole lot more on that faster left a lot on the table in terms of.
Well, it just shows that you don't have to be ketogenic to be a super high fat burner for one.
Well, exactly. But the data we're getting shows that you can actually burn more fat on OFM, which includes the Vespa, than you can on a straight keto diet. Because remember, the average was 1.64 and the high was 1.78 in faster. That was peak fat oxidation. And, you know,
we've seen over 2.
You and Peter are able to sustain over 2 grams a minute for like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's data nobody's ever seen. And back to the whole recovery thing, the mental shift or aha moment people need to make in this, and you certainly know this from an experiential level, is it's not that you actually recover faster, it's because you haven't done the damage you need to recover from.
Right. And I think that's an important piece that I think at least my experience is that you know, and I have to say this, and sometimes when people are like, well, what's the mechanism, you know, and we've talked with Jason Koop about this too, and what's the exact mechanism. It's at the end of the day, for me, it's like I'm not a scientist, so I don't really care what the mechanism is.
You are a scientist. You're experimenting on yourself.
Well, what I'm saying is, what I mean by that, my point here is that I don't really care what the mechanism is. What I'm getting is consistent data from my athletes that says I recover faster. My experience is that I recover faster, and I've been an ultra runner for X amount of years, and I've done this X amount of hundreds and ultras, and I recover way faster. I have less inflammation, and I bounce back, and I'm able to maintain body, like good healthy body weight, and all of those things. And so whatever that mechanism is, I don't care if you're doing less the oxidative stress to the system initially, just in general, or whether it's a cleaner fuel. It doesn't matter what the mechanism is. I'm seeing the same experience over and over and over again. And I think that's the important piece of this, is that at the end of the day, people want to feel better. They want to recover fast. And if you can recover faster, you can train more, you can train better, and you're going to feel better. And that's what matters, is that you feel better and that you're recovered and you're not inflamed. And if you can keep your inflammatory response down, you're going to perform better, you're going to feel better, you're going to recover faster, and you're going to be back to training faster, and your mental state's going to be in a better place. So I think there's we can get into the weeds, but at the end of the day, that's what really matters to people. That everyday ultra runner out there, the middle of the back of the pack ultra runners, and the people who just want to do this as a lifestyle, it matters that we recover and we can keep doing what we love to do.
Well, and but that's exactly my point. You're an applied scientist. I'm an applied scientist. We're taking the science and applying it. Okay. And so those mechanisms help us to understand that better. Right. And that's the thing. It's like when you can burn more fat, and we know this because when people are doing OFM, which includes using Vespa, it's like you and I both know, if you're doing just low level recovery level work or mid-level range work, it's almost stupid how long you can go on Vespa salt and water.
Yeah. Peter and I talk about that a lot. Pete Mortimer and I, cause he'll go out and do 4 or 5 hour runs on just salt and water and Vespa. And I'll do that sometimes too on my training, where I'll hardly do any calories and I'll just do Vespa. And just in one, I feel like it's really honing your metabolism, your fat metabolism
Absolutely.
more, and it's pushing it to a higher level.
It's sort of like an accelerated fast.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that that's an important piece. But then there's also days where, where we go back to this conversation about, people getting kind of chronic keto and worrying about their carbs. Like there's days when I come off a long run, I'm going to eat 200 grams of carbs that day.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be from good sources. It's going to be from fruit. I mean, go try to eat 200 grams of fruit, carbs from fruit. That's a lot of fruit. And so you can eat a lot of fruit that's very nutrient dense. I think that's another thing that's really important piece of the OFM diet, right? Of the OFM approach, is that we're eating extremely nutrient dense foods. Like there's not a lot of wasted calories. You're eating really, really nutrient dense, bioavailable.
It's real food.
Yeah. Animal products, some raw dairy. For me, it's animal products, raw dairy, fruit, and vegetables. I mean, that's my main diet.
And occasionally potatoes or rice, right?
Yeah. And occasionally potatoes or rice, but really, and probably potatoes way more than rice. I maybe eat rice once a month, but I eat potatoes multiple times a week. I eat fruit every day. So I would even look at it. I was just talking to an athlete yesterday. If we're going to put my food into a pyramid, right? The first half base of that pyramid would be animal products. So that would be fish, fowl, eggs,
red meat,
raw dairy. I eat a lot of red meat, raw dairy, and cultured dairy, and raw cheese and all that kind of stuff. And cultured
and you eat the whole animal. I mean,
I eat the whole animal. Like my wife made liver pate yesterday, so I've had liver.
Right.
I had liver yesterday. And we do bone broths and all kinds of stuff. And so that's probably my bottom half of the foundation of what I do. And then the next part of that pyramid would be fruit and starches like potatoes and white rice and stuff like that. And then the last pyramid peak at the top for me is vegetables. So they're last on my list. Vegetables are the least focus. And I think one of the cool things that's come out of the carnivore movement is this discussion. And I think Paul Saladino does a really good job. Dr. Paul Saladino does a good job of bringing this up. He brings the discussion points towards the toxic load of vegetables, which never is discussed in the mainstream nutrition. And we never talk about the toxic loads of grains. Now, grains get some discussion within paleo and primal blueprint circles. They get that is a talking point. Like grains have, lectins and phytic acid and that kind of stuff that's blocking nutrient absorption and that kind of stuff in your gut. But we don't really talk about the toxic load of kale or the toxic load of spinach. So,
oh God, don't even get me started. If you look at the primary literature on studies they've done on kale, feeding it to ruminants, it's a horror story.
Right. And it's so high in oxalates that
it's a nutrient binder. It actually takes nutrition out of your body.
Yeah. And so that's where I think I love that discussion point that's been brought up by the carnivore movement. Now, and that's why I one of the reasons that I've shifted my approach a little bit in OFM to be in that pyramid I just talked about. It's animal based with, and I personally care about the environment. I personally care about like what we're doing to the environment. And if you really dig into the literature and the real science behind this, the grain industry and the monoculture vegetable industry are ruining the planet. They've knocked us out of our natural ecosystem because what should be there is ruminants. What should be on all that farmland is actually grassland or wetland.
Yeah. Alan Savory's been the real pioneer of this with his holistic management. And the thing I want to posit to people out there who are more plant-based or kind of looking at this about and listening to us talk about animal products, the thing I like to posit as a biologist is you really got to look at it as the cycle of life. And when you look at natural systems, there's this cycle, and ruminants play a critical part of that cycle. The biome of the earth that processes the feces and urine that they do so that the plants can get it, and the sunlight growing the plants, the ruminants eating the plants, the predators hunting the ruminants. It all feeds into this constant cycle. And what's happened is we humans have disrupted that cycle at various places, and
especially with monoculture.
Absolutely. And we both come from agricultural backgrounds, so we're well familiar with it, right? We can do a lot better by restoring that cycle of life or mimicking nature by cycle of life. And that's what Alan Savory's done with his work, because he saw that culling all these animals off the savannas of Africa actually made the problem worse than better.
And I think there's been a study there's been a study out of the University of Michigan, and there's been a study on White Oak Farms in Georgia, I think is where it is. And that's showing like, if you have a grass-fed, grass-finished herbivores like cattle on grass, where they're supposed to be on grass, not putting grains in their mouth, but putting them on grass, they actually grow. We're growing soil. We're creating a giant carbon sink, and we are actually
there's a net carbon sequestration going on.
The sequestering of carbon is going on during that life cycle, and you're actually offsetting the entire life cycle of the animal, and it's actually carbon negative. So it's like really an interesting thing when you really dig into it. Another good book out there for people listening would be Sacred Cow by Diana Rogers, and who's a registered dietitian, and hold on, I'm drawing a blank on the other author, Rob Wolf, who wrote Paleo Solution. They're co-authors on that book, and there's also a documentary on the same name. Interestingly, the mainstream doesn't want to carry it, like Netflix and stuff, because they don't want that narrative out there, but because it messes up the vegetarian narrative that keeps the
it actually messes up the big money that's going into this monoculture ag you're talking about for the alternative meat products, which are highly lucrative.
It's highly lucrative. When you process something, you make a lot of overhead. There's not a lot of overhead, so they make a really good profit margin on that type of stuff.
Well, and that's a lot of the reason why the benefits of meat don't get out there is the margins are so slim on production. And this is part of the reason that's driven the factory farming the way it has. And we've got to get back to more margins so that people can get the better nutrition, but also be able to make the money to where they can educate people on the benefits of having some meat. And that brings me to a good point, though. I've coached some very high level masters athletes who are vegetarian, but they weren't vegan, but they were vegetarian. So they're ovo-lacto. And one of the things I've observed working with these super high level athletes, your level elite masters athletes, is when you get that balance of animal nutrition right. So they were so focused on their athletic performance that they were willing to make some small compromises in their vegetarianism. So as soon as we got the liver capsules and the gelatin capsules into their dietary stuff, their performance went through the roof. Their injuries disappeared. Their chronic issues, challenges disappeared. And that got me thinking that, with regard to the meat, especially for those who are environmentally concerned and tilting more towards that plant-based diet, when you do this properly and source it properly, the amount of animal products you actually need is surprisingly small. And I think the carnivore movement has kind of gone off the rails a little bit, because you see all this chest pounding about eating 2 to 4 pounds of meat a day. And it's mostly muscle meat. And it's like, I know from myself, I mean, if I'm not super active, 8 ounces of grass-fed hamburger and a couple of eggs is like, that's my protein for the day. And my body says, you got plenty.
Yeah. And from an athletic perspective, like at my level, I need a lot more protein a day. So I eat a decent amount more than that for sure. But I would argue that you can, if you're sourcing your protein sources from pretty good sources, meaning as local as you can get or regional as you can get, and that's as simple as like doing some Google searching and finding a grass-fed, grass-finished beef operation where you're buying a quarter of beef and putting it in a freezer. I mean, that's what I do.
Or chickens that are running around eating grubs and dead animals and everything else.
Yeah, totally. I think if you can support that, one, you're voting with your dollars. You're actually voting environment when you do that. When you vote when you go buy from a local rancher, you're actually, that situation is they're putting animals, ruminants, on what they're intended to be on, and they're supporting a carbon sequestering. So if you are doing that, you are supporting the environment. And I really want to encourage people to read Sacred Cow, look into Alan Savory's work. If you really care about the environment, look into that stuff, because that's the natural way the planet was designed, was giant grasslands, not a bunch of corn, soybeans, and wheat. So
yeah, it's part of that cycle of life. And and humans have disrupted that, and there's been unintended consequences as a result.
Absolutely, which is not good for the environment. It's not good for our planet. And it's not good for us to eat. We're not supposed to consume corn, soybeans, and wheat all the time. Maybe occasionally you could eat some corn, but like, you're really not supposed to be eating much wheat, and you're really not supposed to be, that's a famine food. If you look at the history of humans and you really do dig into it, we store, it was to store for times of lean. And that was the only reason we became farmers in the first place, was to get through famines. So,
well, I'll disagree with you on that, because agriculture and the consolidation of power and wealth was based through agriculture and all this. But when you look at hunter-gatherers, which is most of our existence, I wouldn't say it was feast and famine for most of the population. There was isolated famines, but I would call it more feasting and fasting, just like a lion does. When a lion kills
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah. Now, also for people, this is something everybody can do in their everyday life. So on the other end of the spectrum, if your budget doesn't allow you to do that, you can shop the sales at the supermarket, because they use meat as a loss leader. Meat and chicken, meat and poultry and pork are loss leaders. Eggs eggs, liver, things like that, they literally give away. Produce in season. These are all strategies you can do on a budget. It's not like you can actually, I posit that if you're intelligent and know how to shop for your protein and your foods, they subsidize dairy heavily. These things don't cost you any more than the what are called economy foods like beans and rice. I would posit that a lot of those kind of foods are actually more expensive, not just in the actual cost, but also in your health and stuff. If you start doing that, if you're on a budget. So if you're on a budget, things like I said, meat and poultry and pork as a loss leader, shop the sales, produce in season, eggs. No, they're not the best eggs out there, but when you look at store-bought eggs, they're still, for what you're getting, they're a bargain. Livers are
that's one of the things why I bring up the book Sacred Cow, because one of the things they go into in that book is that when you look at it from a health perspective, if it's commercially grown, like more commercially grown, or a grain-fed grown versus like grass-fed, it really, like from a nutrient perspective,
the nutritional profile is clearly better. No doubt about it. All I'm saying.
No, wait. Let me finish. The nutrient profile really isn't that different. That's one thing they couldn't make a big argument on. They wanted to be truthful, and they couldn't make a big argument on the nutrient piece of it, but they could on the environmental piece. And that's where your argument for like grass-fed, grass-finished is even better. Now, yes, the nutrient profile of grass-fed, grass-finished versus grain-finished beef, it say, for example, if we're talking beef, right? Let's just talk steak. The nutrient profile isn't that different. It's got a little more omega-6s in the grain-fed.
Yeah, it's got the conjugated linoleic acids are a little higher in the grass-fed.
Crazies from a health perspective. But as an argument, if we want to debate an argument and have a debate argument, but if you get into the
environmental
side, there's a huge cost to grain finished and grain, because there's a ton of like diesel fuel and tractor use and transportation. And
they're not capturing. They're in the way we conventionally raise animals right now. They're not capturing the total cost.
No, and they don't in grain. When they talk grain, your footprint in grain, they don't compare apples to apples when they compare say meat production versus like grain production. They don't include the whole life cycle of grain production. So they don't. You got to dig into the data to really understand that they're trying to manipulate. They're trying to manipulate the public into thinking that eating grains are better for the environment than eating meat, and it's not.
Well, and that's my point. So if you're on a budget or convenience and you can't, you're in an urban area, if you shop the sales and get these things, you can do it cheap, because the grains, like you say, they're not capturing the full price. And when you buy the grains, even when you're buying in bulk, like rice and beans, they seem cheap on the front, but when you're not satiated, you're eating more, and then you got to take this or this vitamin because you're not getting that nutrition.
Well, not to mention, we aren't even talking about bioavailability, right? That's the nutrients in that food, right? Beans and rice is like 40% bioavailable, whereas the 6-ounce steak is like 92% bioavailable.
But the carbs are 100% bioavailable.
Yeah, they go right to your waist.
They go right to into your bloodstream and to your liver, and exactly.
Yeah, and jack your blood sugar up.
Right.
And then you have an insulin issue.
So the point I'm making is, you not only, if you do it intelligently, you can actually you can do it on a budget that's similar to any kind of economic, but the standard budget, but you'll save money, but you're also going to save huge on the health consequences downstream, right? I mean, you see that with your athletes when they get converted from the high carb diet to the OFM.
Who's doing a really good job of getting that message out is Dr. Paul Saladino. If anybody wants to follow him on Instagram, I think it's Carnivore MD 2.0. And he's not doing strict carnivore. He calls it 2.0, where he's using fruit, raw dairy. Really, he's kind of doing OFM. And I think that he's had some posts on just eating that way on a budget he does a really good job of like getting that data out if anybody wants to follow him.
Yeah. And as far as the vegetables are concerned, like I'm a vegetables are optional, but for a lot of people, they work really well. So if you cook them like salad, because lettuce is really not that harmful until you start adding kale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
romaine and arugula are the two like least amount of anti-nutrients in them as far as leaf lettuces go.
Yeah, I mean, and your iceberg lettuce is just water with a little bit of fiber holding it together, right? Exactly. So those things you can eat raw, but a lot of vegetables, a lot of those issues go away when you cook them. So if you like vegetables, this isn't a thing, don't eat them. It's just that the things that Jeff are talking about, like the lectins, the phytates, all these things that plants use literally as chemical warfare to keep animals from eating them, get diluted. So enjoy your vegetables, because your non-starchy vegetables are a good way to attenuate your hunger, because they got more volume than they have calories and nutrition. It's mostly fiber and water.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I'm not saying don't eat vegetables. I'm just I guess I should clarify that. I still eat vegetables. I don't over consume vegetables, and I care about the sort, which vegetable I eat and how I prep them, because you need to prep them appropriately. And when you know that, like you're talking about, you break down some of those chemical compounds that are kind of toxic to you by the cooking process or the prep process, whether that's fermenting, whether it's sauteing or baking or however you cook.
Fermentation is probably the best way, but you're absolutely right. And also that's you bring up a good point though. Like I say, vegetables are optional. People need to be aware that if they're having some sort of issue, inflammatory response and stuff, the first place to look is vegetables. A lot of people are genetically predisposed to having inflammation from things like corn or wheat, especially the gluten in the modern wheat. A lot of New World plants like eggplant, potatoes, tomatoes, nightshades.
Yeah, nightshades.
New World, the salad. A lot of people have salicylate allergies just genetically, and so those are things that you have to kind of watch for. But when you cook them or prep them right, and if you enjoy them, it's certainly something to be an option. So we don't want to sound like we're bagging on it. And yeah, but the base nutrition, the most dense nutrition and bioavailable comes from your animal products, because that's literally what our digestive tracts have evolved to be. It's like I say, we're omnivorous carnivores. We're not a true carnivore like a bear or a pig. Those are from a digestive tract thing. Bears and pigs are true omnivores. They can go either way to the extreme or in the middle and do fine. Where even the really good vegan nutritionists, I've read a lot of there's some vegan nutritionists who I really respect because they get it, and they're the first ones to say you can't get all your nutrition off a plant-based diet. You have to supplement with B vitamins. You have to supplement with your your DHA and EPA omega-3s. They're really clear about what you got to do to make it work.
Yeah.
So, and finally, let's talk a little bit about your Vespa use and all that. I mean, you said you use Vespa pretty religiously for 2 hours, got a booster here and there.
That's, if I look at stuff that I wouldn't race without, Vespa is definitely one of those. I would, a lot of people, I get a lot of questions on how to use Vespa, like just through Instagram and stuff like that. So I think it's good to kind of clarify usage and how to use it. You use it in addition to your carb drip of calories during a race or a long run or big adventures. So it's more of like, think of it more like a supplement than it is like replacing everything. It's not a gel necessarily. So I use it every 2 hours, 30 minutes before and then every 2 hours, in addition to my carb calorie drip that I'm taking. So my glucose drip of whatever I'm using. So for me, it's Guru Octane. I have some athletes that are using, Scratch or Tailwind or something like that. And so just using it kind of as a supplement. Now I also
sort of like it sort of helps create that internal base base fuel load.
Yep.
Right?
And in the initial testing we've seen some like bumps in fat oxidation rates from Vespa compared to baseline, fasted baseline. And we've seen that across the board, even in high carb athletes in some initial testing. So I do encourage my athletes, eat no matter how they eat, to have Vespa as part of their like nutritional strategy. The other thing I encourage them to do is in training, if they start using Vespa, start backing off on their calories per hour a little bit, just a little bit at first, like, 10 to 30%, try it, even back off a little more, 40%, and see how that feels. And if they need to bump that up a little bit, but what you'll find is most people will be able to back off on their overall hourly calories if they're supplementing Vespa in there too, which then offsets the cost of the Vespa too. So then you're bumping up your fat oxidation rates, which is really good for recovery. So like, I think using it that way. The other way I use it is I use it on my harder days, like in my shorter workouts. So I use the concentrates, the little ones, for like long runs every 2 hours, like during racing, because they're small and they're really easy to pack. They're smaller than a gel.
You can pack all you need for a 24-hour run.
Yeah, they're super small packets. They're like 2/3 of the size of a gel packet. So I use the concentrates during training and during racing because they're small. You just got to chase a little water with them. And they're more concentrated in the amino acid peptide, the wasp extract. And then the other piece of this that I use it for, I use CB25s a lot. The ones that already have like the filtered water in it. I use those for like, I'm going to go do a 2-hour run, but I don't want calories. I just want to do salt and water, or like, sodium water, electrolytes and water on a 2-hour run or something. I'll pop a CB25 before I go, and then I won't carry any calories. And then you can hammer, or if I'm doing a harder workout. So if I'm doing speed work, I always take a Vespa, before I head out, 30 minutes before.
The way I advise people is take a Vespa for your long stuff, and use it if you're going out for more than 2 hours. You take it every 2 hours, and then take it for your harder workouts, your higher quality workouts. Do a warm up, and the way I describe it, and you probably know this from your experience, the way I describe it to people, because like with the long stuff, you're getting a benefit of the Vespa because you're not your caloric intake is either drastically reduced or nothing, right? But in the harder stuff, the way I describe it is, as long as you're not fatigued or something else isn't bothering you, you'll consistently feel like when the difficulty of the workout pushes against you, you feel like you can push back rather than just hang on. Yeah.
And I definitely that's how I've always leveraged it. I also use the Vespa Juniors with my 11-year-old and my son. My oldest son was USA competitive climbing for a few years. He's now 20, so he's not competing and climbing anymore. But when he was, we started giving him Vespa before meets, before like matches, or like when they're doing bouldering contests or lead climbing, depending on the time of the season, what they were doing, what they were focusing on. But I mean, he just felt more focused. He could, because it's very, very mentally intensive too, because it's blind climb. So you have to go, back against the wall. You can't see the route until you only have 4 minutes to climb. So they ring a bell and you stand up and turn around and look at the route, and you have 4 minutes, the timer's on, and you have as many tries as you can to get to the top in 4 minutes. But you have to take that time at that first like 20 seconds or 30 seconds to go boom, boom. Okay. I think that's my moves, envision the moves, and then go do it. And he just felt really on it. And so he got to the point where he was like, he didn't want to do the route without it, like do a competition without it. He always was like, when we were walking out the door, I need Vespa, So he noticed a difference in mental focus and in clarity.
And the motor skills, right?
And motor skills. Exactly. And then the other way I use it, I have an 11-year-old who likes to run. And I just, I use Vespa Junior for him before we go to like run club. And one of the things I noticed, this is just observational data. But when I give him a Vespa, if I forget to give him one, he kind of has a crappy attitude. But if I give him a Vespa Junior, he is like on. He wants to run. He's really good attitude for the run club. And sometimes they do, interval workouts and stuff like that, which he likes to do. He thinks it's fun. but like he does them for that. Or the other way I use it is if I'm doing like a longer adventure. I just took him up Mount Eldon, which is a 2,300 foot climb. It's a 5.5 miles round trip. It's super technical. It's our peak next to Flagstaff. And I took him up it on Friday. It's the first time he's ever summited it. And I took 2 juniors. I gave him one before, and then I brought just plant or a Boulder brand potato chips with a little, so he had a little sodium, and I gave him 1 S cap, and then I carried all the water and I carried the calories, and all I had to do was give him a little bit of calories here and there. And I gave him the juniors, and he was like, boom, boom, on the whole time. Never had a low, never had a bad attitude, was super chatty the whole time. Like we zoomed up and down it in 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Great.
And the only thing that was getting him is right at the end. It was all the downhill, like big drop-offs on the rocks. Like his legs were starting to feel it, because he just didn't have that kind of like eccentric training on his legs.
Yeah.
But like he loved it, and he had a great time, and he had a good attitude. And I just kind of strategically gave him Vespa and a little bit of calories. Didn't need many calories at all, but it's more to like, they're just like, kids love the snacks, and it's like a perk. So the potato chips were a perk.
Right. But using the Vespa with just that little perk is a whole lot better than what the sports nutrition for kids athletic has become. I mean, I go to these things with my kids and I see what they're giving them. It's like, oh my God, this is just setting them off on the wrong trajectory. Yeah,
exactly. So anyway, that's kind of my, my personal use cases of how I use the product. I think it's it's definitely a integral part of my nutritional strategy and racing and training.
Yeah. Just as a side, Jeff, a couple of weeks ago, I summited Whitney, and then 2 weeks before that, I summited Whitney. So I did two Whitney summits within 2 weeks, and they're both pretty fast ascents. But those were fasted Vespa salt and water. Right. And the first one was out there for 9 hours. The second one, we were out there for like 14 because the guy I went up with kind of overextended his knee, and it took a long time to get down, but had no lows, just felt awesome. You know, and it was just Vespa salt and water, and Whitney's 6,300 foot of elevation gain loss.
Another way I like to tell people who aren't familiar with the product, and we've been joking about this, me and Nick Curry and Pete Mortimer, we call it the Vespa Challenge, and that is carry some Vespa, don't use it, and just carry it during a race. And if you have a low, pop a Vespa and drink a little water with it. And I guarantee that you will feel a lot better. 10 or 15 minutes, and you'll be like on all of a sudden and feel really great. And you won't even need that many calories. So, or if you're having trouble getting calories down, like just pop Vespa. And so that's what we call the Vespa Challenge, jokingly. And I think that's kind of, that's Nick Curry's original kind of use case.
That was his first time using it. Was he had it on him and he got desperate at
he couldn't use his hands, so he couldn't take gels, he couldn't take his calories. He had really cold hands, like where you can't use your hands anymore during a 50-mile race. And he ended up like having a friend had given him some Vespa, and he had a volunteer actually at I don't know, maybe mile 28 or something, took it out of his pack, put it in his mouth, and like he didn't do any calories, and he just went on Vespa. And he said he normally would have bonked bad because he was a high carb athlete at the time. And he realized that like, wow, I have consistent energy and I haven't had any calories. Like, what the heck is this stuff?
Yeah, he was super skeptical too prior to that experience.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's kind of how I use it.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks for this conversation. Any final closing comments on how far you've come and Moab 240 and what you got going on? What do you got next?
Well, before I signed up for, I sent an email and I got an invitation to Desert Solstice Invitational in the 24-hour in December. So as long as my metatarsal is okay, I'm planning on being on 24 hours on the track in Phoenix in December. So I've never done that before. It's totally
that's going to be a challenge for you.
It's out of my wheelhouse. I've never done it. And I kind of just wanted to do it to try it and see what it's like. I'll probably never do another one after this, but that's what I have on the plan. And if my metatarsal head is like kind of still aggravated and I can't really get back,
you're going to pass.
If it's a limiting factor, then I'll not show up there and probably do something. I'm looking at cold water rumble 100-miler in January in Phoenix as a 100-miler to do. So that might be a backup plan. I don't know yet, but I just entered the lottery for Hard Rock again. So hopefully I get picked in the lottery again. I got a lot of tickets. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and as a shout out to Aravampi Running, I mean, I've done a couple of the across the years runs. I never thought in my life I'd do a run like that, but they put on such a good event that I'm like, this isn't bad at all.
No, it's kind of fun. It's really social. I think that's what's cool about these loop courses, or even the multi, like the 24-hour time stuff. Like I'm kind of interested to try it. I wanted to do something where I didn't have to worry about logistics and crew and getting friends to try to show up. My wife's just going to go down there and hang out at the track and, crew for me. And so it should be pretty simple. And it's close.
The vibe is just so good at that thing. And then of course, I'm hoping to put together some more testing in January or February.
Cool.
Somewhere around there and kind of get the protocol. We'll have to get together and nut out some protocol, because I want to get some distance. I want to do some blinding, and I want to space out the testing so that we can get both recovered. Because the things I saw, the takeaways from that testing were this: you and Peter are living at 7,000 feet and training anywhere from 7,000 to 12,000 to sea level. That's a big lever in the fat adaptation.
Yeah,
that's one big tool, is that altitude acclimatization. That's one of the reasons you guys were able to burn over 2 grams a minute consistently. The other thing that I noticed was just how big an impact doing back-to-back testing has. I mean, you burn some matches, especially ultra runners not being accustomed to going that high. I think Jason made a comment in the interview with me, like you can't account for that, but I'd have to say the data is pretty consistent that for ultra runners, you can't do back-to-back VO2 tests and not have an impact. I think. Yeah.
And I'm just interested to see what we've talked about in the past as a different protocol. I think there's other protocols out there that we could do that would be interesting to see. I'd also like to see some longer 3-hour efforts on a treadmill,
Well, it's like, if we can get this thing going, I mean, put it this way, Jeff, the data we got, particularly on you and Peter, but the data we got on everybody, there's no other data out there like that.
Not 2+ grams a minute.
No. Yeah. There's nobody out there doing 2+ grams.
Not that I've heard of.
Nobody's got it. I mean, if they had it, Jason would have said something, right?
Yeah, they're seeing 1.2, 1.3 grams a minute as a max, even in some like high volume carb athletes, that they're seeing some higher fat. It's not super common, but it's happening, right? We've seen those. Right. We can say there's those numbers. I'm not seeing anyone that's over 2 grams a minute. So,
right. And the impacts of this are huge, not just for performance, but on a cellular mitochondrial level, but for longevity. I mean, the longevity thing, the more you're in beta oxidation, which is the true fat burning state, ketosis is actually a byproduct. It's a proxy because you can measure it. But the more you're in that fat burning state, the less oxidative stress, the less lactate load, the more your body's processing cholesterol for what it needs to be done, because cholesterol is the building block for our entire cells. It carries the proteins, it carries all those fatty acids. The more robust you are, and I think that's where the real impact for longevity and reversing chronic diseases or preventing them comes from. And then the other little thing, as we close this out, that I want to repeat to people going into winter, and this as well as I do, is just preventing the common cold, the influenza, and that other thing that nobody wants to talk about. And here it is. And I'll go to a very basic part of virology that people have forgotten, but it's just basic and nobody even argues about it. And virologists won't argue about this because it's established science. It's that viral strands replicate glycolytically, which means they have to have, your cells have to be metabolizing glucose to cause viral replication. And this is why the studies are showing that people who are fat burners aren't as impacted. And that's why, you know, like you probably noticed since you got fat adapted, you just don't get sick in the winter, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do every once in a while, but usually it's because I'm going to the well and training. And so your immune system's knocked down a little bit. But I even notice it like with my family, because I have 3 kids, like it'll go through my family and sometimes I won't even get it.
Yeah.
You know, especially if I'm being, and if it's going through my house, I'm like, especially since COVID, I'm just more educated on like the viral replication process, you know? And so like, I'm more conscious of it. Like when I see who's getting sick, I'm like, you know, I'm using that clear, which is like that xylitol, you know, like nasal spray. I'm using that to clean my nasal passages out because that's where your first replication starts, is in your nasal and back of your throat. So like I'm cleaning that stuff out, right? That's some of the work that Dr. Peter McCullough has been doing and showing that like if you just do that, right, when you know you've been in contact with that's sick. The other is just, you know, I always go really low carb and higher protein, low carb during, even if I'm in hard training, I'll just go take my protein higher during that when there's something going around in my house. So that way I know that the body's going to have a harder time, like, or that virus is going to have a harder time getting a foothold because it doesn't have a lot of glucose to feed on.
Yeah, it doesn't have the environment. That's the thing. If your cells are burning sugar, you're inviting them in to have a replicating orgy, literally.
Yeah.
And when they're burning fat, it's like this is a hostile environment for viral replication.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And that's the thing, when you're run down, fatigued, some sort of chronic stress, of course, that triggers more cortisol, which triggers more sugar burn, which is going to facilitate viral replication. So, you know, this all makes sense. So that's just one more, you know, aspect that of fat metabolism that is a good time to be discussed right now as we go into winter, you know, keep your vitamin D up, do proper supplementation. Like you say, you do the xylitol. If you get cold, take a hot Epsom salt bath, keep your magnesium up, zinc, you know. But this is
there's actually a great dark horse podcast, Brett Weinstein's podcast. There's a great dark horse podcast on vitamin D. I think he did it last year. He interviewed 2 vitamin D researchers. Really interesting on vitamin D supplementation and health. Really, especially when it comes to viruses. So really interesting podcast if anybody's interested in kind of going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, as you know, that was one of the first things I had you do, was do the vitamin D protocol I developed back in 2008 or 9. And I did a lot of research, reading Michael Hollick and some others. Michael Hollick's like the foremost researcher in vitamin D. And it was like, you know, unless you're doing something really proactive, you're suboptimal and probably deficient, you know?
Yeah, especially if you're inside.
Yeah.
You know, if you're inside most of the day, I mean, because you really only get vitamin D absorption when your shadow is shorter than your height. So if it's late in the afternoon or early in the morning, you're really not, even if you had skin showing, you're really not getting that much vitamin D absorption. It has to be kind of
and you have to have your clothes off, right? You have to have a lot of skin showing, and you have to have it midday. And then, you know, when you live above the latitude of like Monterey, California, Santa Cruz, Monterey, you don't get vitamin UVB this time of year. People just don't know that stuff.
Yeah, you don't get any. You get nothing for like 6 months of the year. So you have to do some kind of supplementation. We just aren't outside as much as we used to as humans. So, and we cover up. So we just don't get the absorption anymore. So I think that's a really important, and this is where it comes back to like liver and all kinds of stuff, right? Because it's high in vitamin K.
You need to take the vitamin D with liver for the vitamin A, vitamin B, and the vitamin K2 that's in liver. And then you also need magnesium because our diet's pretty poor in magnesium these days.
Yeah. Cool.
So cool. All right, man. This was a great chat.
Yeah.
Hope
Thanks.
you enjoyed it.